Well, it's not a Facebook Live if you're not actually having some issues with your recording. Hi, I'm Sam Hayes, and I wanted to talk to you today about the new car forms that are coming up in June. And there's a few minor changes, but the majority of them are pretty basic. So I think this will be a pretty quick little video. I will also provide links to the redline documents that have been provided by CAR and also the summary sheet in the comments below after this, or I can come do this presentation for you or your office anytime. Let me know how I can help. A little bit about me. I've been working in the Southern California real estate industry for over 20 years. I'm a CAR certified transaction coordinator, forms trainer, certified in short sales, trust, probate specialist. I really love this stuff. And I'm also a realtor, and I've worked on over 7,000 transactions at this point. Not all of them have closed, but I've gotten to be part of them. Before we get started, I want to make sure you think about these three things. One, the CA law changed in January of this year. It stated that if a form was created or a document was done prior to going under contract and the form has been revised, you can still use that form. So that means if you had last year's TDS because you've had a longer listing right now and didn't do the update per California law, currently you can use that form. But the problem is, right now, your E&O and CAR forms typically don't cover you unless you use the most current version of the form. So that's why you're always going to want to check with the broker of record to make sure what they want. I would suggest out of risk management to always use the most up-to-date forms possible when you can. But again, double check with your E&O carrier as well as your broker of record to verify that. We're going to jump right in and start with listing agreements. A lot of this is pretty basic that's been changed. As you can see, the majority of issues have been that smart home features have been included. It's also adding signatures. I don't know if anybody else noticed, but by the signature lines, when they did some of the revisions in December, email and contact information was removed, which made it a little challenging to know how to get a hold of clients. So that has been added back in. This has also been added to both the CLA and all of the residential listing agreements that you can discuss with your client. Do they want the offers presented as they come across, or will you be holding them for a specific date? It really depends on your strategy and what you're working on with that client and that property, but there's now a way to indicate what the preference is and have it documented on record. Specifically to the lease listing agreement, there are actually two new forms that have been created for the rental properties. Well, it's more of a split, I should say. The RPOD, which is the rental property owner disclosure, is now also being split into the RPOQ, which is the rental property questionnaire. I'll go into that a little bit more as we go through this, but those are some forms that now will be included when you were taking these listings to get more information about the property, to provide some to the tenant and also to the broker so they best know how they can market and what is being provided. The vacant land listing also allows now for offers to be received or held until a specific date. And it clarifies that the seller and broker are responsible for their own attorney fees unless one of the parties does not agree to mediate. Made sure everybody can find everyone by adding that contact next to the seller's signature paragraph. The cancellation of listing has also changed. With this, any number of the paragraphs may be checked. However, in paragraph 1, multiple options may apply. It's also been clarified to discuss the amount to be paid if listed with another broker. So is there still a payment that's due if this has been now relisted because you're canceling to go work with another brokerage? As always, all of these different paragraphs are the results of different lawsuits, calls into CAR Legal, and trying to stay up to date with the needs of the industry. Several of the contracts and agreements have been revised. Several of these are regarding new builds and already built subdivisions, condo conversions specifically. A lot of this is clarifying that if at no fault of the buyer, they have the right to cancel if the property does not close as scheduled. As we know, sometimes the builds can take a little bit longer, and if they're not extensions or clarifications, the buyer has the right, if at no fault of their own for the delay, to talk to the builder about cancellation as well as getting all of their money back. Another issue is that they are still required to be a part of the SB 800 warranties. That has to be also clarified and distinguished. This is added to both the new construction purchase agreement, and this was also added to, I believe it was, which other one was it? There we go. The ABSPA. There's also a clarification regarding leases. There's a lot of the updates to these forms are lease and rental related. Distinguishes between fixed term extensions and month-to-month extensions for your commission agreement, and if the agent is allowed to earn a commission on a subsequent sale to the tenant that they placed, if that tenant chooses to buy the property and that works out. The RIPA is clarified. That's the rental income property purchase agreement. And that is the vacant units and the seller occupied units are to be delivered vacant. If the tenant occupied units are to be delivered vacant, that is the seller's responsibility to get those tenants out prior to close of escrow, unless that is clarified in the TOPA, the tenant occupied property addendum. What does all this mean? Well, as we all know, there's been many changes in the rental portion of the industry, and there have been new rules and new laws that have gone into place. There are challenges due to lack of inventory and past few years that we've all experienced as worldwide adventures. So this is going back through and clarifying who's responsible for what and how they're responsible for getting it to happen. We also have the residential lease or month-to-month rental agreement that is stating that those disclosures that I just talked about, that RPOD, will be the disclosure that will be given to the tenant. The ROPQ is to be given to the brokerage only. Clarification for the team agreement stating that if there is a cancellation and the compensation rights apply, that compensation will be after whatever amount is already paid to the broker. Then it'll be split according to the agreement throughout the team. Vacant land is stating that if you're clarifying this is be investment purposes or something else, not just specifically for your second home that you're eventually building. It also clarifies your type of environmental survey. And it also clarifies that any of those fees are government fees and not, they're specifically for inspections, reports, and conditions that are required. Not something you can waive. Biggest change to all of the counteroffers. That's our seller counteroffer, our buyer counteroffer, and our seller multiple counteroffer is that the appraisal gap in the original offer is affected by the change of price in the counteroffer. So you're going to refer to the contract in RPA 3L2 where it states if property isn't appraised at this amount, we're agreeing that we're going to reduce, or it has to be at a certain amount. Well, if that price changes or that amount changes in your negotiations and the counters, that's going to change the whole contract. It hasn't been so previously. Clarification in the cancellation of contract and release of deposit. This is we're adding language to explain how to fill out if only one party is canceling or if it is mutual cancellation. Also adding language to address a partial release if no deposit is made. This was addressed with the revision of the RPA in December, that a lot of times where we have the early release of deposit, it's not been an issue previously or it's something that's been addressed, but now there is verbiage in the RPA stating that anything you do draw up saying you're going to release the deposit early, we get $5,000, has to be reviewed so that it includes what happens if they never put in the deposit. It's highly suggested, encouraged to have at least your broker, if not your legal team, review this. It has further implications than it did. It always has, but it's getting clarified even more so. So what do we do if you were supposed to release the money, you never put in the deposit? Where do we go from here? How does this get clarified? Is there a plan for that? That's what's being addressed now. Is that something to think about when you're adding that terminology to the contract? Now, remember, anytime you add terminology to the contract, you are practicing law. So it's always good to make sure you double check with the broker of record. And again, also if legal team, if available, to make sure your verbiage will be something that can be enforced and is in compliance with rules, regs, and all the other fun stuff that we get to deal with. The buyer representation, broker compensation. So this is now, if you're representing your buyer, getting them to agree that they are going to pay for your commission. We do not know what's going to come down from the NAR, DOJ, current court cases that are going on. Right now, we are on a stay based on the 8th Circuit Court that they are reviewing many of these forms and the contracts and everything we were preparing in December to be ready for a spring decision, but that's been extended now out till maybe early fall 2023. So a lot of the things that we were revving up for and doing the studies and learning how to revamp the contracts are now completely on hold. So this form, while still very helpful if you're working with a buyer, definitely want to get them under this type of compensation contract. If it's something your brokerage encourages and uses, always verify with your broker. what it's doing is saying, one, we can find the person, so it's adding their contact information back in. Two, if you use the seller pay buyer broker, we got to have this form filled out first. That's how the order goes. You go under, you're going to go show properties, you have this filled out. Then when you're writing the offer, if the seller pay buyer broker is required, then you will utilize it. So they've revised the seller payment for buyers brokers because of what, as I was just saying, we're not currently using it typically. Most properties are listed in the MLS. That cooperation is being utilized. That's the commission that's being paid. So there's no need for this form. You don't want to mark the box. But if for some reason you find the random one that is not, you've got to have that buyer representation broker compensation signed before. Because if you ask for this, if you say on your contract, I want the seller to pay me, you have to provide that buyer broker agreement showing how much that buyer agreed to pay you. You can't be asking for more that was already in there. I mean, you can try, but typically that's what they want to see, is the seller is going to absorb that buyer cost that was agreed to. So again, this is only needed if the representation has already been signed that we just talked about, and compensation through the MLS will not cover the full amount that the buyer's agreed to with your brokerage. So if you see one at 2% and you've gotten your buyer under at 3%, you can address this, but I would recommend you definitely discuss it with the broker of record ahead of time and decide if that's the best business model for you. But right now, this is not typically in play. The representative capacity disclosures have all been updated. Basically, they've removed all these multiple extra boxes going, well, is it for an assignment? Is it for at the time of the listing? Is it for, it doesn't matter. What it is we need to know who is signing for what and what their authority is to sign on behalf of it. Now, with that, we need to remember, one, typically you don't have to use this form if you complete section 15 on the RPA, where it clarifies, or on the AOAA if you're doing an assignment of contract to a trust or something along those lines. So you can save yourself a form if you just take a few moments to fill out that section. And B, per RPA 28, and it's also in the VLA, the CLA, and CPA, all the agreements, is to provide proof of signing authority. Well, what does that mean? Well, that is proof. So the party signing on behalf of the entity within 3 days of acceptance is to provide to the other party escrow proof that they have the authorization to sign. Excuse me. And without that, that is actually an item you can notice to perform. And it's not the form you get from escrow. It's supposed to be, there's a document in the trust or the LLC, what are the articles of incorporation, or the letter of administration, or the copy of the power of attorney. All of these items need to be provided. The RCSD itself is just not enough. So make sure you're paying attention to that. And we have several acknowledgements, addendums, and advisories. There's little changes on everything. It's not major items. The additional broker acknowledgement is including the names of the agents, not just the brokerage. The AOAA is going to let you clarifies if are you removing the original buyer, or is the original buyer's, like, say the wife is being removed, or we're adding the husband. It's a clarification to make it a little bit easier. There's been some gray area about who marks which box and where, but it's really not too much of a revamp of the form. The BHAA is clarifying that the HOA litigation may impact the lender's willingness to loan on the property. I would highly suggest verify with the broker of record. If you're submitting an offer where you have a homeowners association that you're aware of because of the MLS, I would include this form along with market condition advisory to be signed with your offer so that you have proof that they were notified prior to going under contract. Cash for keys clarifies that you need to seek legal counsel if you're doing that regarding a tenant, and it's not just about payment, but also the tenant is agreeing to get out. So they are releasing the property in occupancy by getting the cash for keys. The disclosure information advisory is been updated. Now, this is something that we've kind of always known, but this now is in writing, that it reminds the seller to provide any current and past documents, reports, anything along those lines. So with the way the market's running right now, I know I've had more cancellations than I had in the past. Remember, once you get that, any inspections completed by the buyer per the RPA are to be provided to the seller within 3 days of receipt. And that survives cancellation at no cost to the seller. So if they have a pool inspection, they've got an electrical inspection, they've got the physical, they've got whatever, all of those documents are now known material fact to the seller that must be provided to the next buyer. This has been an issue before where why are we providing old documents? Why are we providing old disclosures? Well, if the brokerage has knowledge, be that you had been the buyer's agent, now you're helping them sell the property or anything along those lines, all of those items also should be provided. So this is a reminder to everybody to make it very clear, any documents, any reports, anything that is known, that is to be provided to the next new buyer. The manufactured mobile home purchase addendum. This is going to clarify if the buyer or seller can cancel if the buyer is not approved by the mobile home park. This can be an issue. Some of them are age restricted, and also the number of humans allowed to be in the property, as well as animal issues and things like that. So this allows for both sides. It clarifies that either side can cancel if it doesn't work out. Notice to reform is also being clarified. This is stating that maybe you said, I want all contingencies to be removed, but you delivered the AVID late on the listing side. So the TDS, you get 5 more days. There's a whole conversation, but this states that whatever's invalid stays invalid. So say you can't do disclosures, but everything else is valid. We're at day 18. Those stay in play. And still it makes it so that we don't have to keep redoing notices to perform. So in case something's sent too soon for one part of it, but the rest of it's valid, we can still use that notice to perform. Otherwise, previously, we've had to redo the notice to perform. It restarts the clock. This does not. This is going to help keep the clock going from the appropriate time. You may have to do a secondary one once that time frame is appropriate. Again, back to that TDS, AVID, 5 days are up. You can give it 2 days prior, those type of things. So you would do a second one for that. But it's helping to make it so that we don't have to keep redoing forms if something gets missed or something is overlooked or the wrong box is marked. Then on the purchase agreement, probate addendum, this is also clarifying that if we do not have court acceptance and court confirmation is required within 60 days of acceptance, the buyer has a right to cancel. They don't have to just keep hanging on to wait for the court system and waiting to get answers on things. And we have a few more addendums, advisories, and disclosures that have been updated, as well as 2 new forms that are rental specific. So the statewide has had a few additions to it. It's probably going to, I believe it's staying 16 pages. I'll double check. This is going to explain that preliminary title reports and the importance of reading them, including those fun CC&Rs and all the other little blue links that are inside those PDFs that people forget to open up. This also states that the state and local jurisdictions may have impacts on the sales and continuing use property due to laws eliminating the use of carbon fuel appliances. That's something we're going to need to be aware of going into the future. This shares the ability to have those covenants, the discriminatory covenants, removed from title. And not everybody's aware of that. That came out about 1.5 years ago, that you can go ahead and request from title to remove some of the discriminatory information, the older CC&Rs from turn of the other century in the 1900s, and other things that we have now all changed and are no longer valid. This also clarifies the solar system owner credits may be reduced change. So there may be some adjustments based on what's going on with the solar. The RPOD that we were talking about. So this is very similar to the seller property questionnaire. And this is to be used by the owner to disclose broker and tenant conditions about the property. Kind of just a quick, hey, this is what's going on. This is trash. This is what's stating. And it's also confirmations that, yes, smoke detectors are in place. Yes, the water heater is good to go. Now, this has been split and a new form was created, and that is the rental property owner questionnaire. And that is much more like the SPQ with the different questions boxes. That is specifically for the broker. That is not to go to the tenant. That's so the broker is aware of what's going on the property and what they are renting, what information they can provide, all of those things. So they have something to back it up in the file. The other new form that's been created is the RUPA, and that's the rental units purchase addendum. This is specifically for a property that is primarily commercial, but maybe has like a little apartment above one of it or something along those lines. It's to be used with your CPA and the VLPA. And it's a little bit more specific. Now, the mixed use, it's similar to the mixed use property addendum. This one's more when you are 60% or more commercial, Where the other one, maybe you've got residential, you've got some units upstairs, and then you've got one storefront downstairs, you would use the mixed use property addendum. So it's just a similar one. It depends on what type of property you're selling on, but same concept, kind of very similar to an SPQ, just answering a lot more questions, giving a place to disclose some of the material facts, and just other where you wouldn't have any other room to do it. The solar advisory now has added one spot for a catch-all for any material facts that needs to be told about the solar system that may not have been included, any problems, any bonuses, anything along those lines. And then the TDS and SPQ are specifically being changed so that verbiage to the top of both of them will clarify how to use when you're using this for more than one unit. So if you have 1 to 4 units, both forms are there. There's always a constant discussion of how many forms do we need? Do I need 3 SPQs? Do I need 2? Do I have to do one for each unit? What do we do? So this is going to help walk us through and clarify that. The seller's purchase of replacement property. So this is going to do 2 things, which I don't know if you've ever run into this, but there are 2 contingencies when you add the SPRP. That's the only time seller has contingencies unless you've written something in specific. This is saying that if we know you've gone under contract, you're already in a deal, you're trying to sell this house to buy this house, that contingency is gone. So it's not like it's floating out in the ether. It needs to be automatic. This just removes it. It's done. You don't have it because we know you found the replacement property. So you don't need that contingency. It also is added 4 and 5 to clarify the buyer and seller's rights for cancellation and get a little bit more into detail, including the cancellation of if the deal they're under ends up canceling, if the buyer's deal, those type of things. So it's a little bit more detailed about who gets to do what, where it's been understood, but not in writing, where it can be circled back to for verification. The TOPA addendum. Now, this is a tenant occupied property addendum. The RPA was changed in December. So even if the buyer is not aware that there are tenants in the property, and that's any tenant, that's any adult who is over the age of 18, who does not pay rent or doesn't even have to pay rent and is on title, that is considered a tenant in the property. And if they're there for 1 second during the transaction, we want the TOPA because, again, of all the changes to the rental laws and agreements and rules and all of that fun stuff. So this then clarifies that it doesn't matter if they're paying rent or not. If there's a human that's over the age of 18 that's in the property occupying it during any time during the transaction, their name is not on title, we need one of these and we need to list that and clarify that for all parties. And the last one that got snuck in because I couldn't find where else to put it, they have replaced the pet addendum. This is clarifying that they're to be used for the service and support animals, as well as animals that are not disability service based. And it also clarifies that some of the rules only apply to your pets, not your service or emotional support animals. And it gets into detail walking you through that. Here's the easy part. So we're looking to start utilizing the phrasing housing provider. Landlord will be removed from all of these forms, and moving forward, housing provider will be the terminology that is to be used. And the lease forms have all been updated to explain the Tenant Protection Act and how to complete it if it's not already covered by it. So sometimes, depending on the property, the age of the property, the situation, it doesn't always get covered by the Tenant Protection Act. So this will walk each of the agents through how to utilize the forms. I know I went through this pretty quick. I'm definitely going to send you all the links to the other forms. And I love talking about this stuff, as you can tell, even when I'm coughing or blue in the face. So please feel free to call me anytime, even if I'm not the TC on the file. I'd rather help the industry and make sure that we're all understanding how to work with these forms, protect our clients, and do a great job that I know you're out there doing. Feel free. I've streamed this into the Facebook group, but if you're picking it up on another group, you can join me at Y with One Stop. There's my email. My phone is surgically attached. Otherwise, I'm all over the place under One Stop TC. And I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you have a great day and I hope this helped. Call anytime. Thanks. Bye.